Can you look directly at the camera? And can you take off your glasses?
This internet therapist has just asked a famous Twitch streamer to show him her face shape so he can diagnose her personality with Indian skull science to the thousands of people watching live. And that isn't even the craziest part. Strap in, everyone, and get your calipers out. Dr. K is a celebrity therapist who does public pseudotherapy sessions with other celebrities to a live audience. He also sometimes posts lectures on his YouTube channel, and sometimes he sneaks in a little pseudoscience, specifically Ayurveda, or Indian homeopathic medicine. If you're wondering what homeopathic medicine is, it's basically like medicine, except it doesn't work. Ideas presented in some of Dr. K's lectures include your facial features being related to your personality, as well as your veins, your hair, how many calories you can consume, how good of a friend you are, and much more. All interlinked into 3 elemental personality archetypes based on wind, fire, earth, kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but with more lead poisoning. For the duration of this video, I will also be referring to him as Mr. K for reasons that will become obvious.
So once again, I can't provide medical advice over the internet. But
I know what some of you are thinking, that you like Mr. K and you like his videos. And if his videos inspired you to go to therapy, I actually think that's great. Props to you for doing something really positive for your mental health. And I actually think that awareness of mental health is a great thing. More than half of all Americans will have a mental illness at some point in their life. Therapy can be an incredible tool. I have personally benefited from it in my own life. Depending on the person, sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's medication, sometimes it's exercising and spending more time with your friends. Either way, I commend you for taking action on your mental health. And if Mr. K inspired you to do that, I think that's great. But for the sake of this video, hear me out and consider having a heart. Or at least a funny bone. Now back to when the Fire Nation attacked. Here's the rub. Mr. K seems to be behaving in an irresponsible way as a public medical professional. And sometimes worst of all, he seems to make unclear distinctions between scientifically supported evidence-based treatment and pseudoscientific ideas with shaky foundations to his young, probably mostly mentally ill audience. And I will dissect his attempts to do that in this video.
the other thing is, I'm confident based on the genetic testing that is statistically significant that this has real scientific merit.
We'll see about that one, Mr. K. But first, let's look at the questionable application of religion and pseudoscience he sometimes performs in his sessions. Like, for example, in this live stream where Mizkif was talking about ADHD, depersonalization, and not being able to enjoy the small things in life.
And that's why I'll eat literally almost anything, is because to me, it's just food. When like people like enjoy the tastes, that's what I really wish I could fix, is the feeling of not being in the moment.
Okay. So I think we can at least start you on the road to that today. So 2 things that I would recommend. One is, and I'm happy to send you one if you don't have one or can't find one. You have a set of prayer beads?
No.
Hey. Do you have a set of prayer beads?
I would recommend a practice, which is that you carry some prayer beads around. And whenever you want to, that is going to be the thing that you distract yourself with. It's going to be an alambana. Okay? So like what I want you to do is like use a set of prayer beads. And if you want to, I'll give you like a mantra or something like that too, which is like something that you're going to repeat to yourself as you use the prayer beads. It's going to be the same thing as the Pokemon cards or the belt or whatever else. Does that make sense?
So a prayer beads, it's not to pray, it's to...
Nope. It's not to
just
pray.
to hold?
Yeah, to hold and to use. So I want you to repeat something to yourself. This is if you want to, okay?
I know you were just talking about how you can't feel joy eating food anymore, but maybe try holding a cross. Maybe carry it around all the time. Maybe wear it around your neck if you want. I mean, if you want, though. If you want to feel better, if that's what you want. If you want to not be mentally ill anymore, maybe consider accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. I like how instead of a mindfulness practice with a pen or a phone or something a person would probably have, he goes with this. Just a reminder that therapy is not like this, thank God. And if it is, you should leave. And then there was this conversation with Hafu about insecurity.
Can everyone solve all their insecurities?
Well, so the answer to that, I believe, is yes.
Really?
Yep. And
You're
and
insecure
in your
about
case,
nothing.
Yes.
What?
Sure.
0 things. So 0 things that people say to you affects you.
Yes.
you Superman, dude?
I mean, that's been well described, right? So, like, there's this religion called Buddhism and this religion called Hinduism.
What is them?
Buddhism.
Oh, Buddhism. Okay.
Yeah, right? And so in Buddhism, they have a system of training to attain a state of moksha or enlightenment, which is a state of eternal bliss, which is what you're talking about.
Imagine you're sitting in therapy and you say to your therapist something like, well, I can't make the right decision all of the time. And your therapist says, that's not true. Haven't you ever heard of Jesus Christ? Just for the record, I obviously can't speak for the experience of the streamers I'm showing here. For all I know, this could have been the best conversation of Hafu's life. Now back to Lily in the introduction of Mr. K's Pokemon system.
You know what Myers-Briggs is based on?
It's sure not science.
And Ayurveda is traditional Indian medicine. And Ayurveda sort of posits that, like, so Western medicine kind of says that everyone is the same.
This is true. Actual medicine has declined to acknowledge anything related to genetics or individual variation.
A doctor learns how to treat a disease, they don't learn how to treat a person.
Mr. K does this thing where he presents his ideas in opposition to Western medicine, which is more commonly known as science. Like the scientific method is some special thing only white people can do. But obviously that's not true. Plenty of brilliant scientists and lots of groundbreaking scientific discoveries come from places like India. I mean, the Indian Medical Association, comprised of over 3 million doctors, calls Ayurveda quackery. Modern medicine has a lot to improve, but the solution isn't pseudoscience.
So Ayurveda starts with kind of a different assumption. It says that all people are different, and that we each have like different elemental balances. Is kind of, they use elements to describe certain characteristics like personalities or physical form or things like that.
Dear God, people, please don't pick out your Pokemon type. Please just go to real therapy.
So there are all kinds of traits. So, for example, you are predominantly Kapha, is kind of think about earth and water. So people who are Kaphas, when their mind becomes stressed, they become kind of isolated and depressive. They start to think negative self-thoughts about themselves. Vatas are different because Vatas become anxious and start thinking negative thoughts about the external world. So they start worrying about, oh, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. Whereas Kaphas, when they get stressed, say like, oh, like, I'm dumb because I did this, I'm dumb because I did this, I'm dumb because I did this. The third element is Pitta, which is kind of like fire. And so when Pittas get stressed, they get angry at other people.
Yeah, this system really doesn't seem like it's shoving you into a box.
And so you're predominantly Kapha, and I think you have Vata as well. And the other thing about Ayurveda is that there are physical characteristics associated with these as well.
What?
So can you look directly at the camera? And can you take off your glasses?
Can we do that not on stream?
Yeah, sure. So I'll do my face, okay? So my face tends to be like a little bit angular. Like if you look at my nose, like my nose is very like angular. Like your face has kind of a rounder quality to it.
At first you might have thought I was being hyperbolic, but no, this man genuinely believes his nose relates to his personality. And trust me, it gets worse.
If you look at my hands, so my hands have very prominent veins on the back of my hands. My fingers tend to be like long and thin. These are all Vata characteristics. So these are very wind characteristics. And I think the other tricky thing about this is that, like, I'm not sure, because all of this stuff was developed with like Indian people. So I don't know how exactly to translate this stuff to other ethnicities.
Excellent point. We really do need a way to categorize people's personalities based on race and skull shape. Well, now it's time to get lectured.
When we think about Western psychology, we tend to think that all human beings sort of have like the same psychology, right? If you study psychology, you don't study like an individual.
Psychology happily acknowledges the effect of a person's innate disposition and genetics and how that interacts with their environment to produce different outcomes. It also acknowledges that not all people benefit from the same modalities of therapy or the same drugs. But okay.
Ayurveda starts by saying that everyone's mind is unique.
Yeah, very unique, but in only 3 ways.
And one of the biggest problems that I think a lot of gamers run into is that they assume that they're lazy or they're not functional or they do a bad job because they're using sort of a standard gold standard. They're using a gold standard of what it means to be successful, like a standard cognitive fingerprint.
If you have a condition called moderate to severe lazy, 9 out of 10 doctors may recommend eternal condemnation.
They think that you should be disciplined. They think that you should be focused. They think that you should wake up at the same time every day.
The West wants you to have a bedtime.
The other thing about Vatas is that their mind learns very quickly. So Vatas, much like the wind, can blow really hard in one direction. So Vatas are super dynamic in their memory. Like, we just learn things very quickly, but we forget things very quickly.
I like how he says this is a correlation when it actually tends to be the opposite. Quick learners generally have better long-term memories.
So remember that Ayurveda says that like your mind has correlations with your body. So Vatas are also what we call people with fast metabolism. So I can basically eat whatever I want to, and I'm not going to gain a whole lot of weight.
I mean, it's obvious. Vatas store all their weight in their angles.
Then there are people who have medium builds, and then there are people who are what we call big boned. So medium builds are Pittas, and big boned people are Kaphas. And so Kapha people who are like big boned, they can eat salads every day and they're still going to be chunky. That's just that's what their Ayurvedic dosha sort of dictates. And Vata people are going to always kind of be thin.
People have different body types, of course, but assumptions about their personalities is a ridiculous extrapolation. Furthermore, weight gain is related to energy in and energy out. How many calories you consume minus how many calories your body burns. People burn different amounts of energy depending on their activity level and metabolic rate, determined by things like genetics, how much muscle you have, and there are all kinds of factors that influence appetite. But saying something like this is just perpetuating a harmful myth that people can't affect their weight and they should be judged based on it.
The other thing about Vata body types is that like they have angular features. So if you look at my face, like my nose is like very like angular, right? It's like sharp. The features of my my face is sort of angular.
You know, I honestly think it's the fact that this stuff is so foreign, it really leads people not to do a double take.
For example, on the last stream, we had Joro. We had someone named Joro, and Joro's a classic Kapha. Like, he has a very round face. Like, I can't even, like, grow a full beard. So Vatas have very, like, scant facial hair, whereas Kaphas have, like, full facial hair.
If you can grow a beard, you're destined to be fat forever. It's just how it is.
And Vatas also use their hands a lot. So, like, I use my hands a lot when I'm talking. My mind also jumps around a lot. Like, for example, just now I just commented about Joro, and I was like, oh yeah, like, I want to say something about Joro, and then I'm kind of coming back. So Vatas are sort of like, they have a mind that's like ADHD.
Can confirm, I have ADHD, and I am both bony and hairless.
So one of the things to remember about Kapha is that they learn slowly, but they also forget slowly. They have very round features, and Kaphas tend to be very, very resilient. So they can withstand large amounts of like negative situations and sort of handle that pretty well because they kind of have like high constitutions or high endurance.
Didn't he say that the fat, hairy, and stupid personality type is more likely to be depressed? Honestly, I don't blame them. I'd probably get depressed if my therapist told me I was fat, hairy, and stupid. But the good news is you're resilient to your fat, stupid, hairy life.
The reason that a lot of people fall into MMOs is because MMOs offer a really wide skill set, like kinds of activities that engage your mind in different ways. And what I like about Ayurveda is that Western medicine says that melee DPS is the only way to go.
Remember, this all comes back to his nose.
Your Kapha is the friend that you've been with for 10 years. They're the person who's always been there for you. They reach out to you from time to time. You guys stay in touch. Or if you're that kind of person, that's a Kapha friend. So it's not like one is better than the other. These are just different dimensions.
Can you believe that this entire tangent is just some fantasy Pokemon system in his mind? Isn't that crazy?
So disease or problems in Ayurveda arise when you're when your Vata, when each of your dosha stats is too high or too low. If it goes like 10 points higher and I hit 85, then I have ADHD.
Ah, shoot, I dropped my Prakriti. Then he puts this hilarious chart on screen to break down the Hogwarts houses that is somehow more broad-reaching and extreme than actual phrenology.
So this includes physical and mental stuff. So I don't know if you guys can read this, but this is weight.
And of course, the angry personality archetype is bald.
So Vatas are usually thin, often difficult to put on weight, visible ribs. Medium build, good muscle tone is Pittas. Kaphas are larger, difficult to lose weight, heavy bones. Vata skin is dry, cool, thin. Pitta skin is like oily, smooth, and warm with a lot of freckles or color in their face. So you guys should go look at Joro and look at the fucking color in his face. He's got a ton of color in his face.
He's mentioning somebody he talked to before. Does that mean that he looks at every person he meets, examines their face to determine their personality type?
Kaphas have like thick skin, cool skin, oily. So hair tends to be like thin, kinky. Like, I don't know if you guys see this, but like my hair is like kinky as fuck. You guys see this? Like it kinks. Like, you see this action? Like, it's not straight.
Wow, he's really trying to sell this to the audience. I wonder why.
So I want you guys to look at the top of my eyelid and see how it covers like the top of my iris. That's classically Vata. So there are even things like the more of your iris you can see, that's like Pittas. You can see the entire iris of their eyes.
This dude is literally telling a bunch of teenagers that his hair texture and eyelids are related to his personality. And this video is free on the internet. Amazing.
One other question that I want to get to is someone asked about Myers-Briggs. So I do believe that there's some correlation with Myers-Briggs.
Good God.
Remember that Western psychology assumes that the mind is like uniform, right? The body is uniform. The heart functions a particular way. The mind functions a particular way.
So many straw men he could run a farm. My heart works different because I'm bald.
And then Myers-Briggs comes along and says, people are fundamentally different, that not everyone is the same way.
Myers-Briggs revolutionized modern medicine.
You guys want to see science? Anyone wondering whether there's any science behind this stuff? Like, this is just theory, right? There's no like science behind it. This guy's like, he's one of these complementary and alternative like homeopath, Reiki people. It's not real. Come on. Can't be real. There's no way. You guys want some science? There's the science. Okay? And are there statistically significant correlations between your genes and your dosha? And the answer is absolutely yes.
I don't know if his Prakriti gives him super long arms because, oh my gosh, that is a reach. Okay, Mr. K, I'll bite. One of the articles he links is from a literal WHO journal that is basically an opinion-based review describing the state of science behind Prakriti in very general terms, and concludes that there is a possibility that there may be a possibility that there is actually some scientific foundation. Very convincing. I'm going to tell you in detail why his second study doesn't prove what he thinks it does, or at least what he wants you to think that it does. And don't worry, there will be bullet points at the end. The next link is a study attempting to find Prakriti prevalence in subjects. Prakritis are the Pokemon types if you forgot already. They start by screening 3,416 healthy male subjects between 20 and 30 years of age at Ayurvedic institutions. From this group, they select 971 who are assigned to the Prakriti with more than 60% dominance. In other words, less than 30% of this fairly homogeneous group of Indian men was able to be assigned to a Prakriti. This seems to suggest that assignment to a Prakriti is unreliable within the majority population, and that one rater cannot be trusted to make the proper assignment. Then they randomly select 262 of the 971 for GWAS evaluation. A GWAS is a genome-wide association study. It involves scanning genomes from many different people to look for genetic markers. This is an extremely small sample size for a GWAS. A recent review of GWAS methodology includes this statement. GWAS often requires very large sample sizes to identify reproducible genome-wide significant associations. A sample size you typically see would be in the thousands, very often with over 10,000 subjects. In other words, this study is very underpowered. In the study, they performed principal component analysis, PCA, using 405 782,000 single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. This is basically a common method for grouping large datasets into covariant groups with a goal to ask what predicts X. In this case, what predicts Prakriti assignment? Given that there are 3 Prakriti groups and nearly half of 1 million variables, the SNPs, there is a high likelihood that SNPs will be co-varying randomly. Just think about it. Imagine dealing 400,000 playing cards to a group of 3 people. What are the chances that one person will randomly get more aces, more clubs, or really whatever? A typical GWAS study does not use PCA, but looks for single SNPs that stand out from the pack. The wisdom of using a PCA analysis for a GWAS study with such a small sample size is questionable. A recent review of GWAS PCA has this to say. Principal component analysis of genetic data is routinely used to infer ancestry and control for population structure in various genetic analyses. In the paper linked by Mr. K, they argue that they control against sorting by ancestry, so it is odd that they use an analytical technique that is designed to do just that. What the study probably shows is that a minority of the very small sample of subjects may have a little bit of common ancestry. Alright, so let's review. Pretty homogeneous group, all from Ayurvedic institutions. Extremely small sample size for an experiment of this kind. Very little specificity in what it's looking for, using a method typically designed to test for ancestry. And the results show that a significant majority of the participants can't even be discretely categorized. So given all of that, How is this supposed to give an exacting understanding of the physiology and psychology of a white teenage boy from Ohio who plays too much League of Legends? Mr. K, if this was a field of research that was exploding with overwhelmingly convincing evidence, why, number one, doesn't anyone in any other field even care to learn what Ayurveda even means? And number two, why are the 2 papers you cite from like 7 years ago? To extrapolate unrelated medical advice to a broad audience off of a seemingly unproven, all-encompassing phrenology system after invoking your medical credentials seems questionable at best and grossly irresponsible at worst. Just to be clear, some aspects of traditional medicine can be integrated into modern medicine, and some already have. But when you test something and it works, it's just called medicine. It's not special to white people, it's just science. You want well-powered, well-designed, quality, rigorously peer-reviewed research that comes to a concrete conclusion. You want trials that control for placebo, that include subjects representative of the population a treatment applies to. If you want to claim something is scientifically backed, you really have to prove it. It is very questionable to give out medical recommendations to a young, mentally ill, vulnerable group of people with such a shaky foundation and brazen exaggeration.
There has to be a physiology behind this. And that's just how it works. So Ayurveda has been looking at this. So Vatas are prone to autoimmunity. Autoimmune disease is a Vata disease, right? So there are correlations now. So now there's a huge area of research emerging in Ayurveda. And the more that we study it, the more that we scientifically analyze it, the more correct it turns out to be. Absolutely. So I want you guys to look back at like everything that Gizmo has said. Gizmo is textbook Vata, has fucking lupus, has ADHD mind, is super Vata, has eyes that are larger than their stomach, like has an autoimmune disease. Like I can't diagnose people over the internet, but we kind of diagnosed Gizmo over the internet. Like I don't know anything about Gizmo, but I can predict that the likelihood that Gizmo has an autoimmune disease is greater than other people who are Pitta or Kapha. So that's what's awesome about Ayurveda. Like you can make predictions about your life.
Good news, Mr. K. I don't think you can get your medical license revoked by diagnosing somebody with a Pokemon type.
About Ayurveda is that if you do have an autoimmune disease, if you do Vata lowering treatments, your autoimmune disease should get better. So Ayurveda has treatments like food, for example. There are some foods that will lower your Vata, buff your Vata. Some foods that will debuff your Vata.
And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse.
If you're skinny fat, so skinny fat is just you being unhealthy and Vata. Like, so instead of getting big bone, like Vatas can be fat. It's not like you can't be fat. Skinny fat is a Vata that doesn't take care of themselves. But they don't balloon like a Kapha, and they're not going to get fat in the same way that a Pitta does.
Geez, this seems really complicated. If only there was someplace on the internet where I could get a guide. Oh.
Just look at that phrase, skinny fat. You don't call yourself fat. Intuitively, we recognize that this is a different kind of fat. We call it skinny fat. So Vata is like, doshas are simple to see in your own life and simple to observe.
So simple a child could understand it, or invent it even.
You can see kind of the proof right in front of you with the term skinny fat. It's not big bone fat, it's skinny fat. We know that big bone fat is a different kind of fat than skinny fat. That's what Ayurveda says, is that there isn't one kind of fat. There isn't one kind of mind. There isn't one kind of personality. There isn't one kind of memory. Understand which category you fall into. And once you understand which category you fall into, you can adjust yourself accordingly because the solutions for skinny fat and big bone fat are actually different.
Wait, so if I have ADHD, can I just get a nose transplant? Oh my god, I just solved medicine.
Vatas are cold and dry, and so you want to eat foods that are warm and moist. So anytime you have an option between soup and salad, pick soup. So avoid things like toast. If you have an option between toast and oatmeal in the morning, go with oatmeal.
Oh man, if I heat up cat food in the microwave, it's gonna cure my lupus.
For pittas, you want to avoid foods that are warm and wet. So you want to eat things that are cold and dry. So like a sandwich is a great food for a pitta.
Do you guys think that he missed the day where they taught him homeostasis? In medical school!
Kaphas are cold and wet. So you want to eat foods that are warm and dry. So toast is great food for a pitta. Kapha. You guys can also like Google different, like you can just Google Ayurvedic diet and I'm sure you guys will find stuff.
Okay, let's see here. Vata is a cold and dry dosha. Warm, nourishing foods with moderately heavy texture, plus added butter and fat are good for stabilizing Vata. I think it's gonna take a lot more to stabilize me right now.
Gluten is a prime example of like Western thinking. So gluten sensitivity says that gluten, one individual compound, is the problem for everyone. So remember that some people have celiac disease, which is a true allergy to gluten, and that some people have gluten insensitivity. But if you improve your Vata, if you lower your Vata, your ability to tolerate gluten should improve.
I don't believe there was ever a medical consensus about gluten being a problem for everyone.
Vata corrects, in general, autoimmunity. So if you have MS, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, if you have lupus, any of the patients that I work with, when they come in with these things, I give them Vata-reducing diets, and they tend to get better. This is an example of Ayurveda, right? In that people respond to stresses in different ways, and if you get angry or irritable when you're under stress, you should eat foods that are cold and dry.
If you're bald, it's okay to eat toast, but put it in the freezer first.
The other thing is, I'm confident, based on the genetic testing that is statistically significant, that this has real scientific merit.
His insistence on a solid scientific foundation is so questionable.
So the really cool thing about Ayurveda is if Gizmo balances their Vata, their lupus is going to get better, their anxiety is going to get better, their sleep is going to get better, their skin is going to get better, their bowel movements are going to get better. Because if you lower the Vata, everything that is associated with elevated Vata is going to get better. Right? We know this. We know that these things are clinically correlated, but our system of Western medicine is looking at individual things and tunneling down, doesn't look at patterns and doesn't look at overarching changes.
Let's be honest, at this point it seems like he's just smearing science. Of course, having a well-balanced, healthy diet that works for you is a good idea, but making these claims is very questionable.
Change your diet, your anxiety, your depression, your anger will get better. Like, the fascinating thing is that, people have been believing in Ayurveda. You want to believe in it, fine. The reason that I'm excited behind it, and the reason that I'm such a proponent of it, is because there's actually science to back it up now. And I've seen enough clinical or anecdotal improvement to where I believe it. And it gets better. Okay. So once again, I can't provide medical advice over the internet. But
I'm sure some of you are still thinking, well, Mr. K does a service. Simon Bramhall was an accomplished surgeon and well-respected in his field. He was convicted of having signed his initials on the livers of his patients in December 2017 and has since lost his medical license. Simon Bramhall did a service, but does it make what he did okay? Medical misinformation and health gurus have become a big business at this point. I think it's worth considering whether or not things like this do damage to the faith that people have in doctors, or at the very least, create noise and confusion for people who could otherwise have gotten the right kind of help faster. If you don't value science, then you're just listening to what you want to hear. Let's be honest. Psychology is a pretty fuzzy social science that is on its way to becoming more scientific. That fuzziness or open space between ideas gives a lot of opportunities for people to leap in and give extreme explanations for complicated things. And to a young person with no background in psychology, I can certainly see how they'd come across as believable. I just feel like it's possible to create educational psychology content on the internet without doing all of this, you know?
you have a set of prayer beads?
God damn it.
So when I meet people, people think I'm super smart. Like, you guys think I'm super smart. And then, like, the problem is that, like, if you know me for a while, I'm not going to seem nearly as smart as I come across, like, at the very beginning.